Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is the second build video for the Barra T 4580. In this video, we're going to be bolting up the ZF 6-speed to my Barra and then to the 80 series transfer case. Then we're going to be dropping the whole thing into the Landcruiser. But first, I'm going to talk about engine strategy and engine selection. Straight sixes are unquestionably the smoothest engine out there. From an engineering fundamentals point of view, I think the layout's superior to everything else, and the Barra is one of the best straight sixes ever made. There's a heap of YouTube videos explaining why it's so good, and I suggest you go have a look at them. But basically, cheap, reliable power, and that's why I picked it for this build. My primary goal for this engine is to make it reliable. I want to keep it as close to stock as possible because this car's going around Australia, and I don't want it breaking down on me. I'm not chasing huge power numbers, so I'm going to leave the internal stock and most of the bolt-on stock as well. I made the decision to go with the ZF 6-speed. Autos are way better for four-wheel driving, and the ZF's supposed to be a really good transmission. The ZF bolted up to the Landcruiser diffs and 35s ends up being really close to Falcon final drive, so I won't need to worry about diff ratios, which is an added bonus. These are the three options that I looked at to get a Barra. These are probably the three most common options out there. I've put some rough numbers together for the three options to give you an idea. Option 1 is to get an NA or a gas motor and convert it to a turbo motor. You can see all the associated costs add up quickly, and yes, I'm sure you can do it cheaper if you hunt it around for bargains, but how much do you value your time and not dealing with idiots on Marketplace? The main problem with this setup is the compression ratio on a gas or petrol motor means that you have to run E85, otherwise you'll get pre-detonation, which is simply not an option for me because E85 is not available out in the bush. Here's a list of compression ratios from Wikipedia. You can see the gas or the petrol motor have a significantly higher compression ratio than the factory turbo motors. This is a good lead into option 2. You can buy a gas or a petrol motor and build the internals to be better than a turbo motor, and it'll be brand new as well. The compression ratios change through the pistons, so as long as you get a turbo set of pistons, the compression ratio will come down and you don't have to run E85. I called a couple of engine builders and they quoted me 8 to 9K for this option, just for the motor alone, and then you've got to add bolt-ons. Option 3 is to buy a complete setup. I bought an FG Mark 1 XR6 turbo engine from a local wreckers with 100,000 Ks on the clock. It was sold to me as a conversion with literally all the bits I need to get it started apart from a fuel pump. The engine came with all the bolt-ons, a battery, everything that you see here, and it also came with a 90-day warranty, which is far better than buying second-hand. This means that I need to get the engine started in 90 days. This option seemed the most appealing to me as I don't have a heap of experience with these motors, and it came with all the bits. I took the rocker cover off to check for heat and oxidization. It looked almost as good as new, a little wear on the cam lobes, but that's expected after 100,000 Ks. The plan is to replace all the consumables like gaskets and water pumps before I put this thing back into the car. The gaskets have rolled in. I've got a front and rear crank seal, oil filter, water pump, rocker cover, gasket, turbo gasket, thermostat, and then I've got the fan belts, and then I've also had to buy a new torque wrench for the job, which goes up to 210 Newton meters, so I didn't have one of them. I guess I haven't really done this before, but I do have a comprehensive instruction manual, so I'm just going to follow that and hope for the best. First thing I'm doing is replacing the rear main seal. This is a pretty easy job to do when everything's apart. I didn't end up doing the front main because it had a new timing chain, and I'm just assuming they did it at the same time, and I'm hoping that it's all good. I'm putting in a part-time kit which changes the transfer case from an all-wheel drive to four-wheel drive. So basically what we're doing is replacing the diff in the transfer case with this spool. So this is from Mark's 4-wheel drive adapters. I've also got some locking hubs here. So yeah, pulled the transfer case apart. I've just got to put the spool in here and then re-gasket it all. I've got all my pieces here, so I'm just cleaning it up. And I'll put it back together. Let's talk about a big mistake that I made when I was putting my part-time kit into the transfer case. I was rushing to do the job at the time because I had some other commitments, and I was using a rattle gun to do this part of the housing up, this part of the housing here, and there are actually a couple of O-rings that sit in here. You'll see it when you watch the tutorial on the internet. and they dropped down, and what happened was I was cranking this with a rattle gun, and it actually snapped completely. So you can see in there that it looks really messy, and it shouldn't be like that. That's because I've attempted to weld it. So it cracked right through there and completely snapped into two. I was so angry at myself at the time because I just see this as a massive waste of time. So I didn't actually film it, and I probably should have welded cast alley for the first time. So I just cranked up the amps really high on my AC/DC TIG, and I just went for it. So I welded on the inside and the outside, and I sort of filed down the surfaces until it was really smooth, and then I used a heap of RTV to fix it all up. I hope it holds. No doubt that this will start leaking in the middle of the bush, but hopefully you'll be able to learn from my mistake on this one. Don't use a rattle gun to do this up. I think a socket is the way to go, and yeah, be really careful of the O-rings as they can drop down. So, bolting up the trans using an engine crane, I'm using blue Loctite on all the bolts because I don't want anything coming loose, and I'm also tightening them up to torque spec. Let me just explain a little bit about the engine. This is an FG XR6 turbo engine, so there are a fair few hardware differences between this and a BA and a BF. This comes out of the factory with around 270 kilowatts, plus it's got a little bit of a tune on it, so we should be at around 300 kilowatts. One of the big hardware changes is the rear hump sump on the FG. So let's just have a better look here. You can see that the sump's at the rear of the engine here, whereas on a BA and a BF it's at the front. So one of the big things is the axle clearance that this is going to help me get on the front axle. You actually can use a BA and a BF block, but then bolt a rear hump sump to it. But that's not the route I'm going down. I've just bought the complete motor. So I guess one of the hard things about using a BA or a BF block would be that you've got to drill, I believe you've got to drill dipstick lines, or a dipstick hole. So the front of the casting would need to be, or the rear of the casting would need to be drilled out for this dipstick if you want the dipstick to work properly. Another big hardware change for the FG is a smaller turbo. So I guess this is an advantage for four-wheel driving for my user case because it's going to spool up quicker. Look, I'm not chasing a huge amount of horsepower. I just want it to be responsive. This is the most refined sort of XR6 turbo engine that sort of came out of the factory. There's not a huge amount of difference between this and the FGX. It's got the ZF 6-speed on the back, so this is the turbo 6-speed, so it can handle a little bit more torque than the regular 6-speed. Before getting into it is the engine mounts I'm using are from McKinnon's Cruisers. The crossmember mount and some engine mounts and some weld-on parts for the crossmember there. Here we have the ZF 6-speed on the back of the Barra. So what I've had to do to get it to mount to the transfer case is actually cut the back of the spigot off. So normally on a Falcon there's a drive shaft coupling that sits here, and I had to take that off and cut the back of the spigot off, and then I'm using PJ's Engineering transfer case adapter. So this spline goes onto this and then fits into the back of my transfer case. So I'll show you in a second. I'm about to bolt up the transfer case adapter, and then the engine's ready to go in the car. Something that I forgot to mention was that I have to drill and tap some bolt holes into the back of the transmission. So the PJ's adapter comes with holes for these 3 bolts, which are untapped. So the Falcon doesn't use these 3 parts of the casting. So I've got an 8.5mm bit and an M10 tap. So I've got to do that before I bolt the transfer case adapter on. I just bolted up the PJ's off-road transfer case adapter. So this is probably a good opportunity to talk about built versus bought parts. It wouldn't be too bad to make in CAD. The problem being that I'd need the ZF 6-speed in CAD, and I'd also need the transfer case in CAD. But apart from that, it wouldn't be too bad to make and then actually machine. I guess It comes back to the age-old question, time versus money with project cars. I just want to get the wheels rolling. I want to get this thing driving, and it's going to keep me motivated, and it's not going to be a 10-year build. So I have decided to purchase something like this. There's quite a lot of development work involved, and another reason, I guess, is also driveline reliability. I'm happy to, make trays and guards and that sort of stuff, but when it comes to driveline, you best not muck around. At the end of the day, you don't want this breaking down in the bush or the middle of the outback or something like that. So that's some of the reasoning behind why I got this sort of setup and decided not to make my own stuff. And same with the engine mounts. So I'll show you them in a second, but let's just have a quick look at this beautiful piece of machining. I really, really appreciate good machining. I've done a couple of years of cam and using a 5-axis and a vertical mill. So I think this is a 2-op part, one from each side. It's really nicely finished. And just to give you a bit more background to it, this side's the Ford side, so everything mounts up to the ZF 6-speed. And then this side's the Toyota side, and it mounts to the Toyota 80 series transfer case. I've got an engine mount bolted up. So this is from McKinnon's Cruisers up in Queensland. They've done the development for the Barra. So this is just a weld-in kit. Now the location of the motor is up to me. I can put it anywhere I want, essentially. But yeah, so I just, again, to speed the process up, putting the motor in is a big tick on the list, and it'll get me more motivated to just pump more hours into it. Whereas if I was mucking around making these mounts, everything would go a lot slower. And once the engine's in, I guess packaging around the engine then becomes quite a lot easier. So yeah, I did decide to buy this kit, which makes life a lot easier. Fitted the transfer case on, so you can see the PJ's adapter works absolutely beautifully. Yeah, really nice piece of kit. And then I have put the engine on the engine crane. This is actually the first time I've used an engine crane, and I'm solo today. I don't have any help, so I guess don't laugh at me too hard when you're watching the time lapse of this, but I'm going to try and put this into there. I've done some rough measurements, and actually I'm thinking that I might have to cut the floor out. It's actually quite a long setup. Like, actually take a look at it. It's so long. So you can see behind me here, there's one mounted Barra. It's just past 10 p.m. My housemate Dave ended up coming home and helping me out. I couldn't do it by myself. So don't be afraid to ask for help when you're doing this stuff. Yeah, I should have just asked for help from the start. But this is the most excited I've been in a while. So the Barra is in. It's not mounted, but you can see the engine mounts are here. I've just got to put the backing plate on and tack them in. The engine's not quite in the right position. I think longitudinally it's actually not too bad. There's like a couple of mil, or probably like 40 mil in between the back of the rocker cover and the engine. What do I need to do? So I ended up taking the transfer case off. Transfer case will come to about here. So no doubt that'll have to be cut. And then the firewall is going to have to be cut. Oh, I don't know if you can see it, but the firewall is going to have to be cut as well, just to accommodate it. Not a huge amount of cutting, but yeah, a little bit of cutting is going to have to occur. So that's it for today. Yeah, huge day, most productive day I've ever had in a while. Feeling stoked. We've got another few days next week working on it, so hopefully I'll get it properly mounted up and then can start fitting off some stuff. Okay, I've been playing around with the engine position for a couple of hours now. Pretty happy with where it is. So we're just going to drop a couple of tacks in here and on the mounts, and then on the cross member at the back. So we'll show you all the clearances and what we had to cut out in a second. But for now, have a look at the tack. So I only have a TIG. I kind of wish I had a MIG for the job, but I'm going to tack with a TIG and then maybe weld with a MIG later. or if I have a lot of time, I'll just weld the whole thing with a TIG. Here's a good angle showing how much I actually had to cut out of the floor for the transfer case. So I believe this is where the old fuel tank used to mount up, but I'm not going to use that anymore. So I had to cut down into that area. Just use an angle grinder until it fit basically. And then also, while we're at it, there's a good view of the front here. So I've just cut away the top section there. Wasn't necessary. Look, I probably could have got away without it, but it gives me a bit more clearance for the sensors and that sort of stuff. And I'm going to have to make a custom trans tile anyway, so yeah, why not? Let's just have a quick talk about the engine mounting position. Everyone wants to see the detail. So on this side, you can see the engine mount all tacked up is 75mm from the shock tower. And on the passenger side, okay, yeah, 65mm. So the back of the engine, the manifold is probably, when I put my finger down there, I can clear it and sort of move it around a little bit. So I'd say probably 15mm from the firewall. And then I measured this before, and if you can see that, we're probably 50mm from the firewall. So the top of the rocker cover is 50mm from the firewall there. So what does that mean? You can obviously figure out for yourself that the engine is not directly parallel with the frame rails, so it is sitting to this angle just a little bit. There's no idiot's guide to mounting engines. There's no hard and fast rules about it as far as I'm aware. So why did I run it on an angle, you ask? And that's because of this front drive shaft here. And how did I mock this up? I actually used a piece of PVC tube and ran it from point to point. And that's where I sort of figured out that it doesn't look like it was going to work. So this edge here looked like it was going to clash on the drive shaft. So that's why I've mounted the engine to one side a little bit, so I get a little bit of extra clearance. Let's have a look at the trans mounting for a second. So as you can see there, the PJ's off-road adapter bolts an 80 series mount. I don't know that it matters which mount you use. I think I got an auto one, and I actually had to use a die grinder to make the holes a little bit bigger so it would fit, but there's no problems with that. And then let's have a quick look at the cross member. So this isn't actually the correct cross member. My one's still in the mail, but I've just tacked it up for now. I'll end up welding this part to the chassis, and then the cross member will be fully removable with a couple of bolts. This is a completely stock serpentine setup like you'd find in an FG Falcon. The beauty of this is I didn't need any relocating kits to move bolt-ons around. So if I need to replace a belt in a remote place, I'll just be able to use a Falcon belt. Look how beautifully the Barra fits into the 80 series chassis. It's like it was meant to be. That brings us to the end of build video 2. Hit like and subscribe if you want to see more. I really enjoyed reading the feedback from last time, and it made me more motivated to film another video. Next video, we're going to be using some questionable techniques to start the Barra for the first time within the 90-day warranty. Little insight into behind the scenes here. Had some feedback on the last video that the lighting wasn't good enough in the garage. So I went out and bought this $25 ring light off eBay. And now every time I look at the camera, my retinas are burning, and I'll probably go blind at an earlier age. But these are the sort of things I'm willing to go through to keep the people happy. Hope you enjoy it.